Welcome to my channel. I'm Elizabeth Liz Muschett, and today is Magical Astrology with Robert Pacitti. Hi, Robert. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me. We've been talking about doing this series for a little while, and I've gotten, I think we're going to be off to a good start today.
I think so too. So, Robert's a consulting astrology, a vibrational, and uses psychological techniques. Also, a tarot deck creator, and his website is deepearthastrology.com. And I'm an astrologer, author, and intuitive and tarot reader, and my website is alightpath.com. And I'll let you take it away, Robert.
Yeah, so today we're going to be delving into the concept of planetary charity. And one thing before we get started is I wanted to kind of clarify the difference between magical astrology and astrological magic, because while astrological magic is certainly magical astrology, they are two different things. There is a very successful school, a lineage that really started with Robert Zoller, coming into play through Christopher Warnock, Clifford Hart. Low. And what we're talking about today is more of how to incorporate astrology in more of a magical way, not necessarily using just the concepts of astrological magic, even though we are going to touch on some of those topics.
Thanks for clarifying that for us.
Yeah, for sure. So, what is planetary charity? Planetary charity, it's a devotional practice. It does originate from the Vedic tradition. And what it does is it harmonizes our relationship with planetary spirits through timed, intentional giving. Um, the reason why I like to kind of teach this first is because it's a safe and respectful form of magical astrology, and it's really effective when we have afflicted planets. So that seems like, oh, that's such an easy concept. Yeah, but we're really tackling some things that we really need to know if we're going to engage in any form of magic. And it's we're kind of building a relationship with either a spirit, if you believe that the planets have a spiritual quality, or an egregore. An egregore is like a collective thought form. If whether you believe that the planets have a spiritual nature or not, I think we can all agree, going back to Babylon, that we have this collective thought form of how these planets are effective, going all the way back to the beginning of civilization. And one thing that's interesting about that is that even when you go into like archaeoastronomy, it's these cultures that were very different and obviously never contacted each other find similar poetry between these planets, which really kind of could lead you to believe that there is this kind of collective unconscious, that where the planetary archetypes are really just woven into the psyche. So whether we're approaching it as a spirit or whether we're approaching it as an egregore or collective thought form of how this planet operates, the key is that we're building the relationship. And the other part of this that is great is that we're using the concept of transmuting something from an inner work to an outer work. We're taking something that's inside of us and we're manifesting something positive out of it. Now, we're doing it for a reason. So it's not the whitest magic that you could ever have. Some would say it would fall into the lines of a tiny little bit of gray magic, since we're looking to get something out of the situation. But it's a very light touch. And when we take that, that ability to take what's inside and manifest it out into the real world, we expose it to kind of the field of everything. We're essentially putting an antenna out there to these spirits and these thought forms and saying, hey, I'm out here, I want to work with you. How can we make this a copacetic relationship? So ultimately, at the end of the day, we're just really making a charitable donation of some kind on behalf of a planet to sweeten the relationship that we have with it. Um, so there is a step-by-step process to go through with this, though. It's not quite the easiest thing in the world, because we do want to establish parameters to make sure that we're treating everything with respect, and that we're putting it in a framework where the magic can feel complete. So the first thing we're going to obviously have to do with this is we're going to have to select a planet to work with. Um, and that'll be based off of many things that we'll go over, but then we need to choose a cause ruled by the planet. What are the things that planet affects that we could donate to to make that interaction happen. And then we want to ritualize the experience. We want to create sacred space. We want to have kind of our vow or invocation to the planet. We want to donate on that day's planet, on that planet's day and hour. And we also, the most important thing, and we'll go over this at the end, is to complete all the promised donations. Do not get into a half contract with Saturn. I would highly advise against that. So we go to the next slide. So, this is always a big topic in astrology is planetary remediation. So planetary remediation is generally about correcting or easing a negative influence of a difficult planet or a difficult aspect. It doesn't need to be a malefic. It's often performed through rituals, mantras, talismans, or charity. And its goal is to pacify or strengthen a planet to reduce harm and restore balance. That is a very spirit forward thing. Do I feel that a Mars in Libra can be turned into a Mars in Aries in our chart? No, I don't. But I do believe that we can integrate that energy and work with that planet, and planetary integration is about kind of fully embodying the planet's energy, whether it's challenging or supportive. We're finding its place within the psyche. And instead of fixing or avoiding it, we're trying to express it in a way that is positive and evolve through the archetypal lessons there, because that really is the point of the chart in so many ways. So you really have to decide which one of those approaches is best for you, whether you want to believe in remediation or not. I don't think, we don't need 5 hours of talking about whether remediation works. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on remediation? We never talked about this.
Well, I've heard that remediation works for people, and I've gone to a couple of talks about remediation. Um, and
Have you ever done any of that work?
not really, because I don't find that it's necessary, but I know
Right.
a few people have tried it, and then I've even recommended to a couple of my clients that maybe they'd want to do that, but they haven't agreed or seemed like they were that interested. So that was fine because we all have free choice.
Yeah. So I think that we can really approach this from either way. Like if you believe in remediation, this is certainly a way to do it. If you don't believe in remediation and you want to take a more integration style approach to it, that works as well. So that's where we're at with that. So, obviously the first thing we need to do is select a planet. What's the need? You know, um, we could have a poorly dignified planet. We use Mars and Libra just as the example. A Mars in Libra is in detriment. Okay, Libra is a relationship sign. Oftentimes, it's about connections. Mars wants to kind of go forward without worrying about those connections. So there can be issues of passivity, people pleasing with that kind of Mars aspect. Being conflict avoidant in ways where that's not in your favor. That may be a situation where we want to work with the planet. Venus in Virgo. Venus in Virgo is very loving in its own way, but it can come off as kind of cold sometimes, too critical in our relationships. So a poorly dignified planet, either in detriment and fall. Challenging aspects, Moon square Saturn. Saturn tends to kind of smother things, and the last thing we want is that square to our moon where we get our nourishment. Mercury opposite Neptune. I worked with multiple clients with this, and it's just everything is kind of a foggy situation when it comes to the thought process. Everything can be Mercury. It can be a very creative sign though as well. And Moon square Saturn can be something where we also have a lot of fortitude, emotional fortitude. So it's not always that these things can have to express themselves in a negative way. There's a multivalent way in which they present themselves, and our goal with the charity is to bring them into their form that is best within our chart. Now, we could also talk about difficult house placements. Mars in the sixth house, kind of being somebody who's always kind of put their energy to the day-to-day task. They're always kind of, the sun in the 12th house, where we kind of feel hidden and not seen. We're not really sure what our purpose is. A combust planet, a planet that, a Mercury or Venus that is too close to the sun, can kind of lose its ability to ego. A retrograde planet's another one. That's a planet that, you can have a retrograde, well, we have one right now, a retrograde Mercury in Leo. That it's a much more internal situation when we have a planet in retrograde, and that is a placement that really wants to be outward and expressive. So that would be maybe some ways that we worked with that. Difficult transits to the natal chart. Right now I'm dealing with a Pluto opposite my natal sun. Like, yeah, I do want to kind of understand that situation and understand how I can use that situation to help the sun and not hinder the sun. A Neptune conjunct Saturn. Wow, we're kind of going through that right now. It's kind of the immovable force and the unstoppable force and the immovable object, kind of meeting each other, and it's just this constant disillusion versus fight back, and that can be complicated for us right now. Progress chart cycles is another really great place to use it, especially during ingresses. A progressed new moon, um, you know, this is going to be the start of another 28-year cycle for you. It's good to have some input. A progressed solar ingress, when the sun moves into a new sign in the progress chart, there's going to be shifts in your archetypal roles of how you're operating within the world. Good idea to spend some time thinking about that and understanding that. And I don't think that the sign is as much of the deal as the planet when we're talking about planetary charity. I think we really do focus on the planet, but at the same time, we have to take the nature or the costume that the planet is wearing into consideration, especially when we're talking about our personal experience, our personal lived experience. Synastry aspects. This is the way that I've used it very well. Because there might be some things that are really great in our chart that we've never really thought of as a problem, but they may be causing some issues in our close relationships. A sun square moon, in a relationship can kind of be, that sun can be a little insensitive sometimes, maybe not really understanding where the moon is coming from. A Venus conjunct Pluto, that can be extraordinarily intense for better or worse. Mercury opposite Mercury. Maybe you guys are copacetic on every level, but you communicate in just such different ways that you have to find that integration point to kind of make it work. And also empowerment and exploration. There doesn't really necessarily need to be a reason to work with a planet other than the fact that you want to explore that planet. Maybe it's a planet that you're not as comfortable with in how you understand it. Maybe it's a planet you have in your 12th house that's not expressing itself poorly, but you want to kind of peek at what's under the covers a little bit more. That is a really good way to use charity as well. So as you can see, there are, this isn't just about having something in the natal chart where it's like, oh, this is an issue. We can use this for any planet for any reason, to kind of sweeten the situation and move forward and get creative with that, because it's fun. Like, that's really what it comes down to. It's really interesting to think about how these archetypes manifest and how they manifest within our own lives, and kind of get out of the chart and kind of get into the psyche and get into the spiritual connection and to get into the magic of things. It gives you another layer of perspective. And I have found personally that at the end of the day, astrologers have to be a bard or a poet, because really that's what we're doing is, we're kind of explaining something that's unexplainable. It's got such a layered level of experience and of meaning and of definition for these planets. They don't just mean one simple thing. So as astrologers, we're often building these layers of poetry within our readings to kind of, and trying to communicate something pre-verbal in a verbal way to our clients. And this is a way of doing that. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. I love that how you said that. That's describes it so well.
Yeah. I mean, that's just, at the end of the day, I am a consulting astrologer, and that's where I approach most of my stuff from. And I approach it from this as well. Putting yourself in other people's shoes with planetary charity is also a really good thing to do. Like, we might not know what it feels like to have kind of a Mars that is a little bit more impotent, and we might not know what it's like to have a Venus that isn't open and expressive. It's a little more cold and service oriented. So spending time in meditation and spending time in these magical connective experiences kind of gives us new perspectives and allows us to connect to things at a deeper level.
That's wonderful.
So I chose Brie Larson as kind of an example chart as to why we may choose Mars. We're gonna focus on Mars just to kind of, for clarity's sake, and to put this all together over the presentation. So what's the first thing that you see when we look at this chart? First, Brie Larson is an actress. She's a writer, a director. She was in a lot of movies. She's been in movies since around 2003, but her big breakthrough was really the Captain Marvel in the MCU universe. And listen, if you're an actress, it's been very well known in Hollywood for a long time that if you get one of those long-term Marvel contracts, you're pretty much, you know, you're going to be skating on easy street for a little while. And Captain Marvel is a huge character in that franchise, and it just didn't work out. There were all of these, rumors of energy issues. She wasn't kind of working well with others. But when you really went to go look at it, like what actually happened, let me dig a little bit deeper. There's really no specific incidents pointed. It's just kind of a vibe. So, her ruler of the chart is Mars, Aries rising, and that Mars in Libra is in detriment and the ruler of the natal chart. It's also conjunct a sun ascendant situation that is also debilitated. So this is a tough placement for the Mars. Mars is also square Saturn and Neptune, and it's also squared Jupiter and at a little looser orb, but just based on what I'm looking at, I have to consider that Chiron as well in there. So this is kind of like, that Mars is the focal point of this T square. So how would you say that this could manifest? Just looking at it, I know that you and I have studied similar.
Well, some difficulties with relationships, one-on-one relationships, but other relationships also, and being able to move forward in relationships. It's like could be a challenge.
Yeah. And where is it squaring? It's squaring the 10th house and the 4th house. That's not where you want those squares in your angular houses, especially, I'm very much of a fan of the ascendant and the descendant, who you are and what you need, and the IC and the MC being like where you came from and where you're going. I mean, she has that same aspect that we're dealing with right now in Aries in Capricorn. That kind of force between, it wants to dissolve, but it's undissolvable. That could be a challenging person at work, or somebody who has challenging relationships with work. And that Mars is really the crux of all of it. I mean, the 4th house, that's a wonderful Jupiter placement, but when you throw Chiron into the mix, like what does that really mean? I know that she attempted to be a child star early at the age of 6. So everything was going great. And then at the age of 7, her parents split apart and then they were essentially destitute. So, I mean, many, many issues. And just that, and with that situation, especially when you're talking about, growing up without any kind of financial resources, a 10th house Capricorn situation is going to be extremely aggressive towards finances being part of the picture, with that Saturn there. So we're talking about two very well dignified planets in Saturn in its domicile and Jupiter in its exaltation at opposition to each other. When they're together, when Saturn and Jupiter are together, that's kind of like metered growth. It's a really good thing over time. When they're at opposite, that's either like feast or famine.
Right. Difficulty at home, difficulty in public life.
Yeah. And that Mars is just sitting right there in the middle of it, literally. And
Yeah, the
just
midpoint.
it's the midpoint, being a problem. So if I was consulting Brie Larson and Brie Larson said, "Hey, I've got this Marvel gig," and she was completely fine in the movie. She was great. I watched her. She was in several because, like I said, this was a major art character that they were planning on bringing in and using. Almost, there were rumors at one point that she was going to lead the MCU and replace Robert Downey Jr., as being kind of the figurehead. It just didn't work out. So if I was going to sit down with Brie Larson, the first thing I would say is we need to do some charity with that Mars. Does that make sense on how we might want to use this?
Oh, absolutely. That would be a great idea.
Yeah. All right.
Ready to go to the next one?
Yeah, we're good. So then we've identified that Mars is the problem, and now we want to start determining the charity. And we're going to go through associations and where we can find that. But this is just kind of a good overall list of, how we can kind of make these donations and where to go with them to make them effective. The sun, any kind of leadership or training causes, things that help people self-actualize, is really the way to go with your sun donation. So job training, stuff like that, really good. The moon is always about, the food, the children, and the people, nourishment. So that is where you can go with that. Food drives, donating to children, women's situations, women's rights situations are also fall under the moon, and just the overall people, poor people in general, is a good place to go with that. You can, if you have an afflicted Saturn as well, that could work there. Mercury, anything educational, learning, or commerce, like, if you're a small business owner, you want to donate to the local commerce community, you can do that. Anything to help people learn things, anything that is educational, maybe like and, coordinate this with your own values. That's really the key. Like, you're not, there's no script on how to do this. Do it where it feels right. Venus is the arts and the environment. Mars, Veterans Affairs. Obviously, we talk about the warrior a lot with Mars. First responders are good places to donate for Mars. Jupiter, anything religious or political. Saturn, our seniors, hospice centers, people who are ready to transition, or anything agricultural as well can fall under Saturn. Uranus, technology, science, research. Now, one thing to keep in mind about these charities when we get to the outer planets is that a lot of these definitions are considered part of just the Renaissance tradition. So these planets were not really in the picture yet. So anything that you see about Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto is kind of a new addition to the situation. But you should absolutely work with those planets. Sometimes you're going to have to. So Neptune, public health, addiction, mental health issues might fall under Neptune as well. Charities that help with that. And Pluto, disaster relief is really a good one. Anything where Pluto is great for anything where you're helping somebody kind of like rebuild their life. They've gone through that kind of process of rebirth. Now, you also see the numbers next to that. So, this is another part of planetary charity, is it's not just about where to donate, it's what and how much. Okay. So, we're going to talk a little about numerology because you're more of an expert on that than I am. But these are from, the three books of occult philosophy by Agrippa. This was a Renaissance text, which essentially is, I would say it's probably, if not the most important, one of the most important books in the Renaissance and occult Western, just the Western occult tradition overall. And there is a whole section on planetary associations, and these are the numbers that are associated with these planets from three books of occult philosophy by Cornelius Agrippa. So the sun is 6 or 36. Maybe you want to donate $6 6 times. That's a good way to kind of work with the egregorial qualities of the planet. The moon is 9 or 81, and you see they're just squares. And there's kind of, I maybe you can explain this to me, because again, I'm not a numerologist, but what is the power in the square?
The power in the square? I don't know.
you know Everywhere I look, I see the power in the square, and people say that it kind of just like it's like taking almost like a fractal level, it's like taking it to a transcendental level, is what the way a lot of people tend to frame it. You Obviously, we don't have numbers for Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto that are going to come from a book from the Renaissance era. So some people might use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Just kind of all the planetary bodies in their order, to use that. Obviously with Uranus being 8, Neptune being 9, Pluto using 10. So I mean, there's a lot of ways that you can go through this, and we'll talk more about the charitable contributions as well. But like I said, like let's say we wanted to donate to our local string orchestra. Okay, we might It'd be fine to do one donation of $7 or one donation of $49, but it would be also awesome if you could do seven donations of $7. You're probably going to confuse the person who's taking all of these donations, like what is going on, but that is really the way to approach it. Is you want to kind of link as many things as we can to the connectivity of the planet to make it more effective magically.
I would think the square would be like this is like the minimal donation, but if you square it, then that's like the optimal. It's like supersize or superpowers it.
Yeah, for sure. And listen, everybody has different means. I'm not saying to go out there and spend, a fortune on this. You could do $6 once and it will be effective. Do not there is a certain school of thought that the more you offer, the more you get. In my experience, I haven't really seen that manifest. What I've seen is just, completing the process is more important than the size of the donation.
Well, and could you do it like every month, like for $7 for 7 months? Would that
Yeah.
work? Okay.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, it's just really kind of piece versus totality. And I
Mm.
think that really you know, it also depends on what you're trying to do. Like if this is a long-term thing where you're going to be doing a lot of inner work on, extending it out to 7 months can be beneficial. There's some things in our charts that we know are manifesting in ugly ways that are not obviously going to be resolved by us just sitting down once and giving $7 to our local orchestra. There's things that are going to take time. So that's really another thing that you want to consider is, realistically, if we want to complete this process and we want to, attune to a better relationship with these planets, how long is that actually going to take? you know, so things to think about.
Exactly.
So then we want to ritualize the experience. I always suggest that we choose a respectful space for the work, a dedicated space. I don't think that you want this to be on the kitchen counter. If you have a space that you would consider an altar space or a private space or whatever your modality is of how you connect with things, like wherever the most sacred space is, it might be outside for you, it might be in your garden. For me, that's how it works. So it's just you definitely want to have kind of a sacred space and connect to that sacred space in whatever way that you choose to. All right, I'm not going to go over the 10 million modalities that we could possibly set up an altar for this kind of thing, but we will go over the basics. So, then we do want to kind of choose the modality and the way that we're connecting to it astrologically. We can do that in its Vedic system. If you're a Vedic astrologer and we want to use mantras, they're certainly available. We'll go over some of them. If we're a Hellenistic astrologer or we're really into that kind of Ptolemaic Alexandrian astrology, the Orphic hymns are really great for that. The Orphic hymns were, it, it's pretty much estimated that they were created sometime between 200 BC and 100 AD. So we would imagine that Claudius Ptolemy was aware of them. He was a polymath, so I mean, he's not somebody that a lot of information escapes from during that period, especially when you're researching things like astrology. If we want to get into do it in a more Western occultist Renaissance style, we'll use a book called The Picatrix, which we'll get into a little bit, and then we can just have kind of an animistic connection. That's what I use. I'm kind of in the middle as to how I view planetary energies. Like, yes, they do have a spiritual form, but yes, they're also collective thought forms, and I kind of work with them interchangeably. But at the end of the day, I am an atomist, and I do believe that everything kind of has a matter and an energy and a spirit to it, and that's how I approach astrology. So we'll go over a little bit of how to do that. Then our magical associations. you know what's good about creating the space if we can't kind of like make it that space where it's special? And that's what really this is about, making it a space that is special and where you can connect. It has representations of that planet. Candles is really the best way to go. Usually the most universally agreed upon method of starting this work. Herbal associations, stone associations, animal, ancestral, or personal associations. If you're working with Mars and you have a dagger that your grandfather gave you, why would you not include that in the situation? You know?
Exactly. That's a good one.
Yeah. So the first one is, the Vedic modality. I am not a Vedic practitioner. I have done some Eastern magic in my day, but not that would fall under the Vedic category. I'm not going to try to pronounce the, these mantras, but basically, this is there is a mantra that is related to the deity of every planet. So, I gave they're called Navagrahas, and you can go to astrotalk.com/mantras to get all of the mantras that you want. So this would be the most traditional way to do a planetary charity, since it is a Vedic tradition, form of magic. Um, and essentially you would repeat this 108 times. It really depends on the planet, and they're very simple. This is essentially saying, I bow down with reverence to Baoma. And really what that means is, you're going to be repeating this 108 times. It's going to be getting into this rhythmic pattern here. Now, with certain planets, like Saturn, there's a period of time when Saturn is, essentially the sign before your moon, in your moon, and after your moon. And that 7.5 year period, they suggest that we do our Saturn mantra 23,000 times. So, if you want to get into the Vedic style of this, which is the origination, you're going to be working with mantras. All of those mantras are there, and you could also, if you Google the planetary mantras on YouTube, you can quickly find them, if you want to hear them. I do not know how to speak that language, so this would be a good thing for Justin to be here. uh, you know, um, yeah. So the next modality would be a Hellenistic modality. Now, this is, this is the Orphic Hymn to Mars. You can purchase a book of the Orphic hymns. Don't worry, there's no copyright on things that were written in 200 BC, so you can quickly find these on the internet. Now, you'll see that these are very, just like the mantras are related to a deity that is related to the planet. This is also related to deity, but it's more like the deity is the planet when we're talking about the Orphic hymns. So, you see this kind of, profanation style. You have to imagine, though, with the Orphic hymns, though, this is kind of, you got to transport yourself to that kind of like that Greek forum style. Maybe there was some music going on. The Orphic hymns were more of a spell song than they were just a recitation. To lovely Venus and to Bacchus yield, to Ceres give the weapon of the field. Like, you have to get into that Athenian modality with this for it to really kind of resonate. But I find that using the Orphic hymns is a really great way to kind of get into the mode. So, this is the way that a good way of connecting to it, especially if you're into that kind of Hellenistic astrology and modality. So this is more of a Renaissance magic modality. This is this is the Picatrix. This is the Cornelius Agrippa. The Picatrix was a book that was written in the Islamic Golden Era. We have, when we're talking about Renaissance magic, one thing that we need to do is make sure that we kind of like update um, our opinions about what the Middle East is and what the Middle East was. When we went into the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages, astrology went to the Islamic Golden Era, and that is where it got a lot of its inspiration from. Um, a lot of Renaissance magic was trying to go back in time to find the power of the antiquity. So, when you read a lot of these Renaissance books, when we're talking about, the three books of occult philosophy or the Picatrix, you'll see a lot of things like planetary sigils. You'll see a lot of Hebrew texts. The reason why they used Hebrew text was because they felt like that was the first language. So that was the language that you could speak to God the clearest with. That was kind of the philosophy behind that. And obviously a lot of, there was a lot of information that was translated from Greek to Islamic, okay? And then it went from Islamic to Latin. and that is where, and then a Latin to English. So, one thing you need to worry about with the Picatrix, though, the Picatrix is essentially like the main astrological grimoire. And if you're getting into capital A astrological magic right now, that is the one that you are going to be working with the most. That is the one that has definitely got the most meat on the bone as far as the community goes. My teacher, both of my teachers, Christopher Warnock was the one who kind of inspired me into getting into a planetary charity tradition, and John Michael Greer was my, is a personal friend. They both told me the same thing. Well, more John Michael Greer. Um, there are traps in some of these books. You have to know your astrology, and you have to kind of know your magic, and your ceremonial magic when you're getting into some of these more Renaissance books, because and your metallurgy, because one of the suggestions for when attuning to Mercury is to put on a ring of Mercury. I highly suggest that you do not put on a ring made out of Mercury. There's also a lot of like animal parts in some of these recipes that are in these books that we have to find analogs for. Now there's topics, whether like, do we use them? Is this just a representation of an herb that they're trying to get across through a more archaic method? You don't know, but you see the difference when we're talking about how the spirit is connected. We have that kind of very inviting, where we invite the spirit in the Orphic hymns. It's very soft touch. It's like, you're a god. I don't, when we get into the Renaissance magic, it's a lot more commanding. It's kind of like that invitation. It's invite to command. You see, like, I conjure and ask you by your names and qualities present in the heavens, and by your request to the Lord God who placed you in power and strength. This is kind of the more like, you see the wizard sorcerer archetype here, whereas the Orphic hymns are a much softer touch. Not to say that this can't be extraordinarily effective. And if you want to get into this kind of magic, I would definitely suggest buying a copy of the Picatrix and buying a copy of the three books of occult philosophy by Cornelius Agrippa. So, animistic modality. This is how I go. I'm an unapologetic druid, neo pagan in a lot of ways. This is something that I just kind of wrote. It came from the heart. It's how I feel about Mars. Some people would say that this method is a lot more woo-woo. It's usually the word described, but I like it. It works for me. Mars strides in boots of flame, each step a volcanic flow. Nettles rise at his heels like green fire, fierce and wild. It's a much more modern poetic style. You can connect to these planets in any way, but I do think it's important that when we're using a planetary charity ritual, that we do include some kind of connective piece that is oratorial or connective. It's just really kind of like sending that resonance out into the cosmos, that, hey, we want to talk. It's like we're ringing a doorbell, and every house on the lane might have a different doorbell, but they all work. Does that make sense?
Exactly. Yes, that makes so much sense.
Yeah. So, I do feel like using color is also a good way to kind of ritualize these things. And there's no lack of astrological color associations, going from all the way the Tetrabiblos with Ptolemy, to one of my favorite books that I feel every astrologer would have, which is the Rulership book by Rex Bills. I mean, I don't know many astrologers that don't have that book.
Yeah, I've had it
Um,
for years.
yeah, I think it came out in the 70s. Like, it's been around for a while. Um, so, we see a lot of our modern kind of associations with all of them across the board, like Tetrabiblos. Mercury is multicolor. Like, we view Mercury as very immutable. Like, Mercury is very mutable in the chart. It can be a lot of different colors. Just because you have a Mercury in the sign doesn't mean that Mercury isn't able to communicate in a different way. There's kind of that trickster nature to Mercury. And I find that very interesting, that they use that Claudius Ptolemy used multicolor for Mercury. It tells you what he thinks about Mercury when he makes that association. Venus yellow, Mars red, and we're on this Mars thing now. please feel free. I'm not going to read every color here with the associations, but you can see how things kind of evolved. What is the one thing that is kind of uh, always the case? It seems like Mars is always red and Saturn is always black. Like there's a lot of interpretation within the rest of them. The ones that I really do want to point out though is the outer planets. I do think that the outer planet uh, tend to be more conditions of color, almost like we view them in a transcendent way than a color themselves. Like Uranus tends to be something that's like electric, fluorescent, neon. Neptune is more iridescent or opalescent. Pluto is kind of like the churning of the swamp. It's kind of just a mix of kind of ugly colors. There's an intensity to it. So that's really a good way to do it, is choosing a candle color that works well with the planet that you're working with. Um, so yeah, we can go on. So there are also all kinds of planetary associations through a lot of the historical books going back. That was something that people like to do. You still see the cookbooks today. Like, okay, well, the sun, use a carnelian. Like we see it everywhere. Um, the best These are the best, most traditional books to get on these subjects. So, if you want to get a really good book on planetary associations for plants, herbs, and trees, I would get the first book. Really, was The English Physician by Culpeper. Um, and first, I don't necessarily mean he's the first person that ever wrote about it, but he's the one who got. This was a very widely circulated piece. Stones, Lapidary. This is actually a recent book that came out that I'm going to plug because I really love it. It's Stars and Stones, an astromagical lapidary by Peter Stockinger. Um, that's a great one. If you want to look at associations of stones to um, planetary energies. Now, there's a lot of books that are all-purpose associations. We talked about the kind of the Islamic golden era, and there's a lot of crossover between that era and the Renaissance magic that we're kind of performing with this. So the Book of Instruction in the Elements of the Art of Astrology by Al Burundi is a fantastic book I feel like every astrologer should have it. It has tons of associations, plants, animals, trees, metals, styles of art, and then the Picatrix, which is a magical grimoire, which an astrological magical grimoire, and it also has a ton of associations. And the translation by John Michael Greer and Christopher Warnock, I feel is the best one. Granted, I have a personal relationship with at least one of those people. And Christopher Warnock, I will say, is probably the leading voice on any kind of astrological magic right now. So a very good source. He's also continues to put a lot of stuff out, and he's great. 3 books of cult philosophy we talked about by Cornelius Agrippa. That's where we got the numerological aspect. There's a lot of sigils in there if you're somebody who likes to work with sigils. Christian Astrology by William Lilly. Most astrologers have at least dabbled with horary a little bit. Lee Lehman is a very, very popular teacher of this modality. Deborah Holding. Deborah Holding just put out a translation of Christian astrology, which is very good because it's easily searchable. There is a ton of associations in there with the planets that you could use in, both defining the charity and how you want to use the work. We talked about the rulership book by Rexy Bills. Give me your feedback on this. I feel like some people think it gets too loose, but in my opinion, I'd rather it be too loose than not enough.
Yeah, I like it because it's like gives you space to work with different things because some people are more strict with it, and it's like
Yeah.
we're flexible and we've grown. We're a different world now, so
I agree with that, and I feel like that's kind of the point that I'm trying to get across with this whole thing, is even though this can be a very structured thing that goes back to Vedic magic and can go back to, a more rigid style of Renaissance magic, you can do this in whatever modality you choose. You do not. This is a form and a kind of a form of magic. This isn't something that is you're going to have to worry about getting like, canceled over or some, like you're not going to be, trying to hybridize anything. This is really what you're doing is essentially just building a relationship with the planet through charity. And personal lived experience is important too. Like at the end of the day, do what works. I guess that's kind of like a little bit of chaos magic there, but I mean, if you have associations that really, help you connect to the idea of Mercury or Mars or Saturn or Neptune, that's what you should use. You know, look through these books though, because they're going to give you a lot of good ideas and they're going to plant a lot of seeds. And these are also the books that if you decide to go further down the path of astrological magic, this is a really good kind of starting shelf, I would say.
And then you didn't mention The Archetypal Universe by Ren
Oh
Butler.
yes, The Archetypal Universe by Rem Butler is a book that I love. This is really the book that I would probably for if you're a modern psychological astrologer, I'd start there. This gets you away from a lot of the more rigid philosophies of the Renaissance era, and kind of takes you into a much more modern mind frame. Ren Butler's great. Do you have this book?
Oh, yes. I have almost all these books. I just don't have Stars and Stones.
Stars and Stones. It's recent. It
Yeah.
came out. I think it came out in like 2019. You know, it. He had just posted about it, and I was like, well, let me see what this is because I'm into natural magic, and it's really good. Um, yeah, the Archetypal Universe by Ren Butler is fantastic as far as viewing the planets as archetypes, viewing how those archetypes manifest. It's this book has really opened a lot of doors for me as an astrologer as well. So all of these books here, I would absolutely suggest that that you grab. Um, the good news is that most of these, other than the more modern ones, which would be the Stars and Stones, the Rulership Book, and the Archetypal Universe, are very old, and they're out of copyright. So you can find free versions of these on the internet.
And I agree with your personal experience because for Mercury, if you had a butterfly pin and you really cherished that pin, maybe your grandmother gave it to you, you could use that butterfly pin. And that's
Yeah.
just an example I would put.
Yeah, I mean, the whole point of creating the sacred space is to make it sacred. And I know that that sounds like just such like an easy aphorism, but it's true. Like, where are you going to feel like you're, you know, connecting to something at a deeply spiritual, personal, special level? That's the goal above everything else. You know, I do find that some of the older recommendations are extraordinarily effective. Mars generally rules things with thorns or points, as far as plants. So I love to use nettle with Mars. You know, what does Mars usually kind of represent? It's our energy, it's our vitality. What does nettle do? In the spring, when we're getting out of the winter, it's something that gives us a lot of vitality and strength, and it kind of brings everything back into balance. Then another easy one is Venus. Venus is like very flowery. It's things that are beautiful, and what do we get when we're giving our lover a rose? We're getting the thorns of Mars and the flower of Venus. It's like, so these associations, they're not there just to be rigid. There is a thought process to them, and to why they exist, and it's very helpful to be able to understand that because it might unlock the ideas for something else. I really like also using like wild blackberry for Mars. For Venus, I love, it's more of a solar plant, calendula, but I love using calendula for Venus. There's something about the smell that connects me to Venus. But learning the old style and the old ways is not something I'm saying that you shouldn't do. I'm just saying that you can use that as a seed to create new foundations.
Right? Be creative and
Yeah.
have fun.
Absolutely. So there is planetary timing. We most of us know this. I mean, just through our, just going through life. Sunday is ruled by the sun. Monday is Moon Day. Tuesday is for Mars. Wednesday is for Mercury. Thursday is Jupiter's day. Friday is ruled by Venus, and Saturday is Saturn. Um, it's good to do these operations and perform these charities on the day of the planet. Again, we're just adding another level of connection. It's like, so we use that, that doorbell analogy earlier with why we might complete the recitation. Now we know that Saturn's going to be home on Saturdays. Now we know when to ring that bell, okay, to get what we need out of it. There is also planetary hours. These are not fixed. The first planetary hour of a day begins at the sunrise and is ruled by the planet that rules the day. So sunrise on a Saturday is going to be ruled by Saturn. Then it follows what's called the Chaldean order, based on the planetary orbital speed. Now, the Chaldeans were a group of people who were essentially the Babylonian astrologers. The first form of Western astrology that we have. They were from the Fertile Crescent, so they were not what we would call Western, but we still use the four royal stars as the fixed points of the fixed signs. There is a lot of connectivity still back to that early Babylonian astrology. So the Chaldean order was set by the planet's orbital speed, how fast it was going, slowest to fastest, perceived from the perspective of the Earth. So on a Saturday at sunrise, it's going to be Saturn. The next hour, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, Moon, and they're broken into 12 hours of the day and 12 hours of the night. Trying to calculate this on your own is very challenging if you're not somebody who does this on the regular. There are planetary hours calculators at www.astroseek.com with a dash there. And Christopher Warnock, who I had mentioned earlier on his site, has the planetary hours program, which I think it's very cheap, like a couple bucks. And you can find that at renaissanceastrology.com. That is a great tool because you just put in, it literally shows you, whatever date you want. It lists everything out for you. It's cool. It's easy to use. It's like, takes up no space on your drive. It's a great tool that I always keep up on my desktop for calculating these things. Now, do you need to do it on the planetary hour? No. I mean, is it going to work if you only do it on the planetary day? Yes, I would imagine it would. Okay, let's not get crazy here. Would it be, again, another level of connectivity to the planet? Okay, we know that Saturn is going to be home on Saturday. Okay, we know, he's in his living room ready to answer the door at 1 p.m. Because that's another, when Saturn is going to, be there. So, all of these levels of connection, whether it's through our associations of color, the adornments that we use, the planetary day, the planetary hour, what modality of connection we make from, a kind of resonant standpoint we make. The deeper we get and the more, we're seeing how this can get really complex. Okay. But this should be simple. That's really what I'm trying to get at. Don't overcomplicate it. If you do not have a planetary hours calculator, don't use a planetary hours calculator. Don't worry about it.
Well, and there are some apps for your phone for planetary days and hours, but I used to have one, but I don't have one on my phone right now, but there used to be some. And I remember when I was having some challenging stuff going on with my Saturn. So on Saturdays, I would feed the crows to kind of feed my Saturn and enhance it.
You literally did planetary charity.
Hmm.
That was atomistic planetary charity what you did. That's what you put together, and what did you get out of that?
Peace of mind, basically. I mean, it just
Yeah.
felt like it calmed it down because it was probably around my second Saturn return and
Mm,
Pluto going over my Saturn and, all those kind of
yeah.
things. So.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that's what it is at a basic level. Now, the reason why I suggest that people kind of look to the old ways and to ritualize things is because it allows us to kind of get out of our own heads and allow us to really focus on building that energy. As there's this old adage that, when you start getting into magic, you have like all of these tools and, your altar looks like, something at a rummage sale. And then as you become more proficient and more experienced, suddenly there's nothing there, and it's just kind of, you have all the tools within yourself. So I do think that that kind of applies, is once you know how to make the connection with these planets, you're going to be able to do that pretty easily, but when you're starting out, especially like a new practice or a new tradition, or maybe this is something that you really want to take seriously, so you ritualize it for that reason. um, I do feel like the associations, the mantras, or the invocations, the colors, all of those add more connective layers to kind of bring you in. And like I said, the more we do, I do find it is easier to connect to those spirits or egregores.
Well, and if you just had a white candle, you could tie a colored ribbon around it for the color if you need.
Absolutely. And I'm going to be honest with you. Christopher Warnock just says exactly what you say, and that is, I pretty much use a white candle for everything. Again, as you start out, you want to do it, build it out. As you get more mature in your practice, you're going to see you might not need as much.
Exactly. Sorry about that.
So we're going to go back to Brie Larson's chart now. We're going to talk about what building. Let's say Brie Larson is somehow listening to our podcast right now, and she's like, I really want to fix this situation. So she knows that the Mars is the issue if she went to an astrologer. I don't think that there's any astrologer that would look at this chart and say that Mars isn't a bit of a problem, at some level. Um, so she looks at the charity. She's like, well, I mean, I'm familiar with the Wounded Warrior Project. Like, that is a charity that goes to warriors. It's very Mars related. I'm going to donate to them. All right. And she's just getting into astrology. She's just, she's just starting to get into the books, and she comes across Claudius Ptolemy, and she's amazed. And she's like, I want to connect to that period of time. All right. So she's going to choose the Orphic hymn to Mars. She's still very wealthy. Maybe she's got somebody playing a little bit of a, Greek lute behind her, or some kind of Greek music. um, Obviously, across all boards and across all modalities, we saw that the candle color for this is red. So, she's choosing the Wounded Warrior Project. She's choosing the Orphic Hymn to Mars. She's choosing a red candle, and then she's like, "Well, what's this? I want to make this a special space. I really want to get over this. I'm going to build an altar. What am I going to use as my adornments? Well, like I talked about with nettle earlier. Like, this is going to bring me vitality. It's got thorns. It's very much it's related to Mars. This is another being that embodies Mars. And then the garnet. The garnet is very much equated to Mars and the kind of subvolcanic activity that Mars lives under and operates under. So then she's going to choose the time. The best time for Mars is on a Tuesday, and then she's going to go to AstroSeek, or she might not, and she's going to try and get as close as she can to the hour of Mars. And then, since what the number for 5 from the 3 books of occult philosophy is the donation. So she's going to donate $25 in total. She's going to work on this for 5 weeks, and she's going to donate $5 a week to the Wounded Warrior Project, using the Orphic Hymn of Mars with a red candle, garnet, and nettle. And she's going to make that happen. So now Brie Larson has now just performed her first act of planetary charity.
So with the Orphic hymn, are you supposed to repeat it more than once, or?
No, really, that's really the Eastern tradition is more about that. But you have to think about what you're doing. I mean, I would not want to read that Orphic hymn. The mantras are basically a line, maybe 2 lines, 1.5 lines. Whereas the Orphic hymns are often, I would say, with the Orphic hymns, the more poetic that you get, the more kind of grandiose you get. Think of Athens.
Mhm.
That is how you would kind of like grandiose that. You certainly want to try and get into the modality as much as possible. The same thing with if you're using the Renaissance magic modality, and you're getting into readings from the Picatrix, and you're commanding the spirit of Saturn to do something, you better say it with a little bit of bass in your voice. Like, that's not something that we want to do meek and mild. And that's why I tend to take the more animistic approach, because it's personal. I know it means something to me because I
Right.
wrote it. and I know it means something about that planet because it's how I feel about that planet. And obviously, I'm a trained astrologer, so I have a decent idea of how that's going to operate. That's really a key too. That's why those association books are great. You can literally open up a book to Alberndi or to Rexy Bills, two very different astrologers, and you'll just see a listing of stuff that's associated with Mars in both books. Same thing with Lily. You'll be able to go to the index, see Mars. She's already flagged everything, Deborah Holdings edition. So, I mean, that's why it's really effective. Like, if you already know all of this stuff, then you can go today. I think it's the key is, building a practice, knowing what you're doing, know what the cause is, knowing that you want to resolve it. And I think that's really the last piece of this is like, what are you trying to accomplish here? We already talked about like I don't think we're ever at least I'm not talking about you're going to take a Mars that is debilitated and turn it into a Mars that is exalted. That's not what we're doing. It's how can we use I also have a Mars in Libra and it's in the 11th house. Okay, I'm really good at kind of managing relationships in communities. I don't necessarily like direct conflict, but I'm trying to kind of use that in a way that like it works for me. So Mars is a planet that I've worked with. Um, your sun. There's reasons why you can have a debilitated sun. I mean, there's a lot of nurture to the sun that doesn't get. If you and I have studied relationship astrology together. If we don't get the kind of nurturing from the familial structure to kind of teach us how to self-actualize in the world, you could have the best aspected sun in the world, and we're not going to get there. It's going to be a challenge. So, what does that mean? That means, maybe spending a little time in meditation, thinking about what that son went through as a child, what the holdups were, and how we're going to manifest that in a way that is different. So while there is the magical acts that we're talking about, there all is also the internal work, because remember at the beginning we said the key magical thing that we're doing here is transmuting an inner work to an outer work. We're identifying this issue that we have with this planet. We're kind of accepting it. We're doing something about it, and through that act of kind of like announcing it to the spiritual field and to the energetic field and whatever you want to call it, we're opening the door for healing. So if that is what you want to call remediation, then I'm all on board. But if do I think that donating $25 to an organization is suddenly going to make my Saturn better overnight if it's in bad shape, or it's a Saturn square moon situation? No, but I mean, I'm going to try to make that Saturn moon less suffocating, and I'm going to try to make it more something that is built on lasting and built on a lasting relationship and building on endurance, emotional endurance versus suffocation. Like taking the positive aspects that we can out of these planetary modalities that exist within their multivalent sphere and making it a more positive experience.
Well, recognizing it and acknowledging what the issue is and to allow the healing
Mhm.
and the growth to work through it. So I think that's
Yeah.
very powerful.
And the other thing is sometimes things that we think are problems are not necessarily problems. I have a good friend that has a Mercury in Pisces, and constantly talking about the Mercury in Pisces. Okay, this person is a prolific artist. This person knows how to communicate at that kind. A watercolor artist, nonetheless. So while those qualities, it may not always work well with. Now this person also has dyslexia, so you could see how that could be related. So the dyslexia, yes, is that a problem? Yeah. you know um I'm also seeing this prolific, beautiful art that obviously came from the mind of somebody with a Mercury in Pisces. So it's really how we look at it, how we manifest it, and turning again, transmuting that inner work, really working with that, bringing it out into the world, and asking the planet for help. And we're asking the planet for help by saying, I'm going to donate on your behalf. I'm going to work with you, not against you. And now we're going to, change the nature of our relationship.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you for sharing all that.
Yeah. This is the most important slide in the whole presentation. Complete all the promised donations. Okay. Do not start this and then stop. It's much better for your psyche and for the spiritual connotations of this work for you to do 125 donation versus $5 donations if you know that you're not going to complete the $5 donations. Like some people just are not good with keeping on top of these things, and it's important to do that, and it's important to finish it, because that could create all kinds of problems for you as well. Now it's like you've now compounded a problem where you feel like you tried to tackle the issue and you failed and you didn't do anything about it. So now it's like, you owe, and as far if we're approaching it as the planet is a spirit, I would not want to get into a contract with Saturn and then break it. That's not something that you want to do. Or Mars or Venus, honestly, any of them. Mercury
Or
might be okay.
Pluto.
Yeah, Pluto for sure, but Mercury might be okay with it, but other than that, I would it's something you want to have uh fully completed, feel good about it, and then maybe you go back for another pass, or maybe, or you feel like you've gotten. I honestly feel like, because I've been realistic about the time frames that I've used with some of these charities, which is key. Um, they've always worked in some way or another. Whether it's awakening me to that this really isn't the problem that I thought it was, or awakening me to, like, you got to reframe this, or you know in some cases, it just felt like it resolved itself. So those are three different ways that you can get a result from this that are would consider a success. um, Now, with the timing of the donation, I would do it on the day, always do it on of the um, the day of the planet. I would try and do the ritual, do the first donation. Don't set space between that, because that's like kind of like leaving somebody on hold on the phone. Like, you want to complete that transaction, that first transaction, however you want to go forward with that. That's how you schedule it. But I wouldn't leave a lot of space. And as far as the planetary hour, um, I think it's, in my opinion, there are multiple views on this, that it's better to do the invocation and to do the ritualized act of this and promising the donation on the planetary hour, and then not worrying so much about making the donation on the exact hour if you're not able. But if you can do it all in one shot, that's how I would suggest it. So yeah, I hope that was interesting.
Oh, it was an amazing presentation on the planetary charities. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we're gonna do some more. I mean, I definitely want to dig into some more qualities and way that we can kind of embrace a magical experience with our astrology. I came from that background. So, I mean, being into the druidry, being somebody who's been a part of the Western occult tradition for decades at this point. When I got into astrology, I really got into psychological astrology. Um, and for whatever reason, and um, there was almost this unspoken thing where everybody's trying to turn it into a science, to the point where they ignore the magic that is on the tip of their tongue, just to kind of keep it more professional. They don't want to turn away people by making it too foo-foo sometimes. And I think that, is that a good approach? Listen, there's very successful astrologers who have taken that approach and done extraordinarily well. I think, though, for a lot of people, making astrology kind of part of our spiritual practice, which I do believe it is for a lot of astrologers, present company included, um, that it can enhance your practice, and it can make you a better astrologer. And I know for a fact that some of those people that you never hear talk about the magical qualities of astrology are doing some of this work as well. So, something to think about.
I can imagine, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Well, I wanna thank you so much, and I wanna thank our audience that has watched live and the audience that come back and watch at a later time. We appreciate you. And, Robert and I both do consultations. I have a newsletter and so does Robert, so you can sign up on our websites. We appreciate your support. And Robert, I'll let you tell about your slide.
Yeah. I've been doing U.S. global currents on Talk Cosmos with Justin. We'll probably be getting back to that in the next couple of weeks. I also do a vibrational astrology podcast with Linda Berry called The Turning Season. She's pretty much the penultimate researcher in the vibrational astrology field. She's always got a lot to say. We are doing our first vibrational astrology focused online conference this year over Labor Day weekend, August 31st through July 2nd. It's called Fractal Cosmos. You can go to fractalcosmos.org. We have some really cool presentations, especially if you're somebody that's really interested in getting into harmonic charts and understanding how those things work, because it can be very confusing. You'll get a lot. There is a beginner track there, so you'll be able to see how that all works. I've also taken a position with the Center for Relationships and Astrology. I'm on the staff there. I know you're a graduate of that program as well. Uh, that this is head by Margaret Gray. She's fantastic. She's put together a staff for essentially a four-tiered certification program. You can go to relationshipsandastrology.com to see all the information about that. And then, yeah, I mean, what I'm going to be working on over the next few months is just kind of, getting everything ready for the deck release, getting all of that stuff going. I'm excited. We're going to be at UAC next year, UAC 2026, with our team, with our relationship team. I'm excited about that. We'll be spending some table time together, Liz.
Awesome. And I think you gave the wrong dates for the Fractal Cosmos. I think it's in September, isn't it?
Oh yeah. End of August to beginning of September. Yeah, over Labor Day weekend.
And then I have other shows with other astrologers. I have the Astrology Star Sisters with a number of topics that we cover. And then um, we do Cosmic Connections, which Robert's on with me, and a couple of other astrologers on relationship astrology. And Justin and I do a few shows each month. So there's lots to come back and enjoy, and more shows in the future. I will be on Talk Cosmos on August 17th. I'm on the Archetypal Symbols team talking about the Virgo new moon at 0 degrees. And I want to thank our sponsor, Astro Peregrine Software, and it's for Mac and Windows. And you can find information about that on astroperegrine.com. And again, Robert, I want to thank you again, and I look forward to having you back on the show. And we're going to say goodbye for now.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.